Hello, I'm Kate Collarulli. I'm the Associate Director of the Sierra Club's National Beyond Oil campaign. This is my first time in Portland, so thank you all for coming out tonight and welcoming us. I've been with the Sierra Club for several years now. I was actually hired in '09 to start and develop the tar sands campaign. And from where we started in '09 to seeing how many people are in this room today and how many of you came down to DC, I just want to thank you. It really warms my heart how this issue is becoming a real issue that people care about and are investing in. So what I thought I'd do is kind of take a step back, talk a little bit about what tar sands are, why, whether you're an environmentalist or not, citizens of Canada, of the United States, of the global community, why we need to care about them. Jim then is going to talk a little bit more about some of the impacts that tar sands are having on our planet. I'll then talk a little bit about the United States oil market and how this is creating the trailbreaker situation that we had. And then Danielle is going to talk more about what pipelines in tar sands mean for your land and water. So without further ado, the tar sands are one of the most costly, dirtiest, most carbon-intensive projects on the earth. They're being considered one of the largest industrial projects. They are so large that just the waste ponds from the tar sands mines can be seen from space, much less the mines. If expansion in the tar sands goes unchecked, it's going to mean creating a toxic wasteland the size of Florida, of Michigan, of England. Huge. These are real pictures. This is really happening just across our border. And they're happening in a province called Alberta. So people talk a lot about tar sands. They talk about oil. I thought I'd take a second just to talk about what exactly tar sands are. They are an unconventional form of oil. So we're not talking about Saudi Arabian crude. We're talking or Texas crude. They actually are a combination of sand, soil, and bitumen, which is a hydrocarbon. And when you hold it in your hand, it looks tarry, and that's where the name originally came from 50 years ago. And when you take that, you can dig it out of the ground, so they're strip mining out of the ground, and you can process it, and over a series of processing steps, you can turn it into something that resembles oil and gasoline. So why are tar sands a problem? Why does this matter? We use oil, we're taking oil out of all parts of the world, and people have different opinions on that, but one of the key things that makes tar sands so different is where they're found. They are found under one of the largest remaining ecosystems in the world, the boreal forest, which spans across northern Canada and into Russia, kind of around the Arctic Circle. This is a picture from the boreal. And the boreal forest is really important for a lot of different reasons. It's the home of 30% of American songbirds, 40% of American waterfowl, critical herds of caribou. It is also, you could say it's the lungs of North America. It stores 11% of our global carbon, global. So when we're destroying the boreal forest due to the tar sands, not only are we increasing more carbon emissions from tar sands, we're also destroying our Earth's ability to combat carbon. And that's kind of what this slide gets at a little bit. So tar sands, they're really famous for these open pit mines. It's a lot like open pit mining, mountaintop removal mining that you might see in the States. The process of producing tar sands is much more carbon intensive. It takes a lot more energy to get them out of the ground. They can be open pit mined like you see here. They can also be mined with a method called in situ, which is when it's a little bit like fracking for natural gas in some ways. We inject chemicals down to the ground, heat the earth, almost like an oven. The hydrocarbons melt out of the soil and then they're harvested and brought back up. So for every barrel of tar sands oil that's generated, we use 2 to 4 barrels of water. We move 4 tons of earth. It's enough natural gas to heat 1.5 Canadian homes for the day. And the process of bringing in all this water and this energy ends up putting out vast amounts of toxic waste. And this is actually a picture. This is one of the upgrading facilities up in Alberta. and you can kind of see what a lovely site that they're creating. So right now it's 32 million acres is the size of land that we're talking about. And one of the interesting things, one of the reasons I included these pictures of wildlife here is that because this is in the midst of this wilderness area, we're seeing like very concrete things that are happening to wildlife. Migrating birds that land in these ponds thinking that they're, a regular pond, getting coated in the oil and falling and collapsing. There are videos of bald eagles circulating them, moose that drink in them. And they don't just hurt animals, they're also a real problem for people. So tar sands has 11 times more sulfur than conventional oil, it has 5 times more nickel, more criteria pollutants. And what this means is that when we dig them up and we refine them and process them, they put off more health harming agents. So in communities where tar sands are either being extracted, like the First Nation communities up in Canada, or where they're being refined, like Detroit, Michigan, and Minnesota around the Great Lakes area, we're seeing increased rates of cancer, significantly increased rates of cancers. And here's a picture there. We work very closely with a lot of First Nations, and what they talk about is that their traditional way of life is being destroyed. They're seeing, these horrible tumors on the fish that they catch in the rivers, here's a quote that I found particularly moving from one of the chiefs where he says, "I look at what's happening to our traditional hunting lands and I lie awake at night. I worry that this is not just the end of our way of life, but the end of all of our lives." So Jim, now I'm going to turn it over to him to talk a little bit more about some of the impacts.
There's seats up front, you might want to just say that there are extra seats around.
There are extra seats up front. Apparently, if people want to move up and sit down, for those in the back. I'm Jim Murphy. I'm Senior Counsel with National Wildlife Federation. I've been with National Wildlife Federation for about 8.5 years now, working on tar sands for the last 2. National Wildlife Federation is, 2 of our largest goals are protecting wildlife and combating global warming. So we're very concerned about the tar sands from that perspective. Before I begin, I'd like to thank all of you for showing up. This is a very impressive attendance, and your activism and interest is very appreciated. And my heart and good feelings go out to those of you, especially those who went down to DC for those protests. You have no idea, or maybe you have an idea, how valuable your activism was in really bringing this issue to national attention and changing really the dynamics on this. And also thank you to Dylan and Emmy and Glenn and everybody else who helped organize this, a very good event. Not surprising, I'm going to talk about wildlife impacts. The tar sands region is really one of the most biologically rich regions in the world. It's very valuable. It's a mix not just of forests. Kate described it as the world's lungs in terms of it stores a lot of carbon. It also provides a great deal of oxygen to the atmosphere. It's not just forests, it's also about 40% wetlands. It has a lot of rare wetland peats and bogs and marshes and other very valuable habitat. It's particularly valuable for birds. A lot of the birds you see migrating nest there. It's really the world's bird nursery. Between 22 million and 170 million birds breed in this region. There are 292 species that use the boreal forest. About 130 of them are in the tar sands area. That's an aerial view of the boreal forests untouched. The impact from tar sands is massive. Obviously, the strip mining completely wipes out habitat. It turns rich landscape into a moonscape. The tailing ponds, which are now twice the size of Manhattan, can be seen from space, are huge magnets for wildlife. Birds fly over, they're tired, they look for a place to land. They see these ponds, they're very attractive. You get a lot of bird deaths from that. You also get moose and caribou and mammals and other animals that go to drink from these fall in or get poisoned. Also, it dewaters the wetlands and rivers. It's an incredibly water-intensive process. It takes about 2 to 4 barrels of fresh water to produce 1 barrel of oil sands. Currently, the tar sands operations are permitted to use about 7 times the annual freshwater use of Edmonton, Alberta. And what this does is when the water is taken, obviously from the groundwater, and used for the tar sands processing, you get a lot of this habitat simply dries up, or rivers flow at lower rates and can't sustain the habitat they're used to sustaining. The tar sands pollutants leak into nearby rivers and streams. The ponds leak about 3 million gallons of water a day. It has all the nasty stuff you'd expect for tar sands to have in it. Also, the fragmentation of forest habitat is huge too. Oftentimes, fragmenting habitat can be as impactful on wildlife as destroying it outright, especially for a lot of the animals up in the region that are very sensitive to noise and destruction and whatnot. And also, there is a lot of noise and air pollution from the compressors. That's what that beautiful landscape I showed you before looks like after tar sands mining. A great deal of northeastern Alberta is permitted to look like this. A lot of it already does look like it. As you can see, a lot of these operations are very close to existing rivers, which allows for a lot of the leaching and pollution of those rivers that's occurring. The result is duck kills that you see, animals, waterfowl getting drawn into these ponds, oiled and killed. You also see the type of tumors and defects that were also shown in Kate's slide. The impact on birds can't be overstated. It's believed that about 58,000 to 402,000 birds have already been lost. This includes a massive 2008 kill where 1,600 birds, mostly waterfowl and ducks, were killed. That resulted in a $3 million fine for Syncrude, which, given their profits, is really just a slap on the wrist. If development rates occur at the rates that the tar sands industry would like, we're talking about a projected loss of 10 to 50% of the forest-dependent bird population. This is loss of habitat for about 500,000 to about 3.6 million birds, a birth reduction of 9.2 million to 72 million over 40 years. So these are huge, huge numbers. And we're talking about another silent spring. These are some aerial photos of the tailing ponds. You can see they're enormous. They're oiled. These are simply huge, huge toxic dumps that are bad for everyone. I want to talk about a couple iconic species that are impacted by tar sands, one of which is the whooping crane, which some of you may be familiar with. The whooping crane is really one of America's most beautiful birds. It's America's tallest bird. It also is critically endangered. It was down to a population of 16 in the early 40s. It's rebounded very slowly over time. We now have about 400 wild birds, which is a very, very fragile population. Cranes extensively use the tar sands area, and they're very sensitive to habitat destruction. They're very sensitive to wetland loss. They're very dependent on wetlands, so the dewatering impacts them. And obviously the tailing ponds are a huge attraction for them. And also, this goes to development in the US. One of the leading causes of mortality among fledged birds and during migration is collision with power lines. And some of particularly the Keystone XL pipeline was going right down the US migratory route for a lot of the whooping cranes. It involved several hundred miles of new power lines, oftentimes in habitat area where the cranes will fly from one wetland to another at a low altitude. And those actually cause a huge amount of deaths. They collide with those, and the collisions are often fatal.